Today we're going to be looking at Mikhail Tal's best queen sacrifice. Now Tal was one of the best players at the time and was known for his incredible sacrifices, which created unrelenting attacks. The game started with d4, knight f6. I'll skip through most of the opening, just going through a couple of details until we get most to the major sacrifice. So here, and f3, I will note, is an important move here rather than playing something like f4. And the idea is something like knight e2 and then bishop g5, queen d2, and queenside castle. And since white is most likely to castle to the queen side and black to the king side, we're going to come up with an opposite castling game. And this means that both players are going to be very aggressive. White is going to be using the G and H files, playing something like G4, H4, and G5, whereas black, on the other hand, is going to be using the A and B files and play something like A5, B5, and A4 and push that way. See castles, knight G to E2, C5, and then a couple of other moves that lead to this position. Now, as I mentioned, both players are going to be very aggressive. And we can see that there are some advancements here, and bishop h6 is also a very important move. And we can see that black has already started to set up this idea of the a6, b5 maneuver. We see queen a5, which is a very tricky move. We can see that the queen is completely exposed with this sort of extra idea, and white plays king b1 with the intentions of playing knight to d5. So for example, if black plays something like b5, well, there's knight d5. The queen is under attack, and after something like queen takes, there's this nice intermediate move, knight takes e7, and after king h8 only move, there is something like rook takes d2, and with this dominating knight, something like d5 closing up the position, it is completely winning for white with the queen trade. There's no attack. And if we go back a couple of moves, here, for example, if white had played anything else rather than king b1, well, after knight d5, black would have just taken the queen with check, which is important, and then white would have had no intermediate move. So that is sort of a small little idea that you'll see sometimes in these games. So let's continue. After b5, knight d5, there was actually knight takes d5, a brilliant move, sacrificing this queen. Tal very much knew that his queen was under attack. However, he gave up the queen after queen takes a5, and now after knight takes e3, there are some very aggressive chances. Number one, this knight is really, really annoying. It attacks the rook and the bishop, and it attacks this c4 pawn. So after rook c1, which doesn't look that good, but it is in fact the best move, and knight takes c4, this knight is really annoying. Again, attacking here the queen, and here this annoying d2 square plus some checks. Rook b8 will come, something like c4, a5, b4. This bishop will open up, this knight might come in, this bishop will open up, and overall, white has an increasingly passive position, whereas black later on in the game will have tons of aggressive chances. And white makes their first move of the game, rook takes c4. Now this might look natural at first, because if we go back, I mentioned that this knight is annoying. This rook isn't really doing anything for the defense. So rook takes c4 looks like a very natural move. While it is sacrificing the exchange, remember, black sacrificed an entire piece, so it is still about equal after this. And white at this point was sort of panicking. They were getting nervous. Tal is known for sacrifices. Out of nowhere, he sacks his queen, and it'll make anybody worry. After b takes c4, we see knight c1. This is the second big mistake of the game. Now, obviously, the c4 pawn is under attack now. However, knight c1 is a very passive move. You usually play moves like this, dropping the knight back, something like that, to a very awkward square to hold some important attacking squares. However, this does nothing. Knight b3 would just be captured. Same with knight d3. And things like rook d8, bishop takes d4 with x-rays against here. And we can see that slowly black's attack is shaping up. And this truly shows Tal's incredible calculation to be able to see this with the queen sacrifice. And rook b8 immediately taking advantage of the open file. Bishop takes c4, knight b6, and bishop b3. Bishop b3 is also the third big mistake. And at first, it may look logical, just shutting down this b file with the open rook. However, moves like c4, maybe a5, a4 later on in the game, and this bishop will be kicked away anyway. You see bishop takes d4, capturing just the free pawn, and there's this x-ray attack, and queen d2. Now, similar to this knight c1 move from e2, white withdraws their queen here in hopes that if there's c4, well, there'd just be queen takes. However, this is not quite the case because there's simply bishop g7, just dropping the bishop back, and now c4 is coming. And white makes another big mistake here and plays knight to e2. Now this is a wasted move. It went from e2 to c1 back to e2 with no clear purpose at all. And in games like this with opposite side castling, tempi is very important, not just for the attack to stay ahead of your opponent, but for the defense. Every move counts. And wasted moves like this could make the difference between a win and a loss. Immediately, c4 taking advantage, and this shows why the bishop is terribly positioned here on b3, and bishop c2. Now the bishop went from c2 to b3 back to c2 again. This is the second wasted move by white, and black will make white pay for this inability to properly defend. We see c3 immediately striking. Now this doesn't look too good at first. Might look dubious to some players. However, in fact, it is genius. The idea is that if knight takes c3, which is the most natural move, the bishop will open up and something like knight c4 will come. So white plays queen to d3. Now typically this whole queen bishop battery lined up here will be threatening me. However, with the fianchetto, there is a pawn on g6, which pretty much shuts that out. And now c takes b2, and this pawn is very, very awkward. So white tries to block off the bishop with knight d4. However, as I mentioned, this move has no clear purpose. The knight went from e2 to c1, back to e2 again, and then now it's jumping to d4. At first, it might look slightly logical, just blocking out the bishop, but again, white cannot take because then this rook will open up. We see bishop to d7, which looks sort of passive, but in fact, it can be aggressive later on in the game. And we see here, maybe the rook will slide over, this bishop will come in, this bishop is active, this knight could come in, and white is so passive and the pieces are so uncoordinated that it is black who is in fact winning. We see rook to d1, another passive move. The idea here is typically to line something up against in the d file. However, with this pawn on d6, there's not really any sort of counterplay. And rook f to c8, as I mentioned, bringing the last piece in from the king side, full on into the attack, and bishop to b3. At this point, we're like, what is white really doing? There's ideas of bishop takes, and then maybe this bishop will come in. And the bishop is just endlessly sliding back and forth for white. The knight is going nowhere, and things are disastrous for white. You see knight to a4, immediately dropping the knight in, threatening knight c3, so white takes, and now it is just lost. Simply lost. Rook is under attack, maybe there's takes, and then something like bishop to c2. The only option here really is knight to b3. However, after rook to c3, there is really nothing This knight is getting attacked. This bishop will open up. The queen is under attack. And this is the final straw for white. Queen takes a6. At this point, it's kind of pathetic how little white is doing to properly defend. If we go back, the position is completely lost here, but still, maybe there is hope that black could mess up and give material compensation. However, after queen takes a6, the queen is just sliding over, grabbing some useless pawn, and now bishop takes b3, a takes b3, and rook b to c8, and it is completely lost. The game continues with queen a3, which is a blunder, and rook c1, rook takes c1, rook c1, and here on move 30, white resigns because the only move, king a2, is met with rook to a1, checkmate. And we can see at this point that it is in fact materially equal. This rook and bishop against the queen combination, plus the additional pawns, makes it more or less equal, but it is black who has the active pieces. Now, I will note, if we go back here, rather than playing something like queen a3, there are some ways to stop checkmate, but pretty much the only move here is queen takes c8. After something like queen takes c8, rook takes c8, it is just so winning for black. There is pretty much nothing white can do. Black is up an entire bishop. We see the rook plus bishop against the rook, up tons of pawns. Position is disastrous with this b2 pawn. This b3 pawn will fall in the end game. And unless white makes a huge blunder, which at the grandmaster level is so unlikely, that there was really nothing white could do. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's game. It was one of Mikhail Tal's best queen sacrifices. Thanks for watching.